Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Look, if you've ever felt completely lost in a sea of corporate acronyms, wondering what on earth the difference actually is between a KPA, a KRA, and a KPI, you are definitely not alone. Today we're going to cut right through all that confusing alphabet soup of performance management and clearly map out exactly how to track success in any organization. So let's just dive right in and decode these terms once and for all. To do this, we're taking a funnel approach. First, we'll be defining key performance areas. Second, we'll look at the 4 essential KPIs. And third, we'll zoom in on measuring success with KPIs.
All right, Section 1. Defining key performance areas, or those broad responsibilities we all have.
Now, the absolutely crucial word to focus on right here is broad. Key performance areas, or KPIs, describe the overarching areas of responsibility that a department, an entire organization, or even just an individual employee might be responsible for. Think of a KPA as the general terrain or department you're tasked with looking after. It literally sets the stage for everything else you do. And unlike other metrics we'll get into a bit later, KPIs aren't necessarily tracked with specific results or results-focused metrics. They're simply the territories you've got to manage.
And these KPIs can be vast, right? They can vary significantly depending on the specific organization, the employee, or the industry you're in. For example, maybe your KPI is improving safety and accident prevention or maintaining good working conditions in a plant. Or if you're on the corporate side, maybe it's improving an organization's risk management and regulatory compliance, using resources efficiently and effectively, or improving business processes and service level agreements. You see, you aren't necessarily slapping a single daily number on these things, but they are the foundational zones you absolutely have to manage just to keep the lights on and the business running safely.
Now, it is super important we separate KPAs from KRAs, which are key result areas. So, if a KPA is your broad terrain, like maintaining a safe working environment, a KRA is the specific destination you actually want to reach within that terrain. KRAs refer to a short list of overall goals that guide how a person does their job. They basically define the optimum outcomes of your daily work, the stuff that's absolutely critical for an organization or an employee to be successful.
And this brings us to exactly why KRAs matter so much inside those broad KPIs, the Pareto principle. You've probably heard of this. It's the idea that 80% of the value you deliver comes from just 20% of the actual work you do. Let's be real. Every job has constant distractions, daily tasks that seem super urgent but don't actually move the needle much for the organization. KRAs help you identify and zero in on that crucial 20%, usually outlined as a handful of specific, measurable objectives. Your KRAs keep you locked on to what truly drives success, while your KPIs just remain your everyday overarching duties.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 4 essential KPIs, your must-have focus areas.
So, while KPIs can cover a massive range of areas and vary wildly, even between organizations within the exact same industry, there are 4 KPIs that are universally important. Every single business needs to identify, understand, and pay attention to these. First up, financials. This includes basics like revenue, costs, net profits, and the trends affecting all 3 of those. Second is customer satisfaction, dealing with things like customer complaints, product return rates, and the results of satisfaction surveys. Third, we have market perception. This is all about how current and potential customers actually view your company or its products. And finally, productivity. This means accomplishing major organizational goals, meeting everyday requirements to keep the organization moving forward, and ultimately keeping customers satisfied. Honestly, if you ignore any of these 4 terrains, your business is definitely going to struggle. Okay, so we have our broad areas of responsibility, and we know we need specific outcomes, but how do we actually measure our speed and progress along the way? Which brings us to Section 3, introducing key performance indicators and actually measuring that success. Enter the KPI, or Key Performance Indicator. If the KPA is your broad terrain and the KRA is your specific destination, well, the KPI is the dashboard on your car giving you exact measurable readings. A KPI is basically any metric that measures whether an organization is actually meeting certain objectives and goals that are set up to help it succeed. They tell you in hard, quantifiable numbers exactly how well you're doing relative to your plans. The whole point here is that a KPI absolutely must be specific and measurable. Let's say a restaurant sets a strategic goal for the year to increase profit. Just saying increase profit isn't enough. Setting a specific metric, like increasing profit by exactly 5% without reducing the gross margin, now that acts as a direct numeric KPI. It's like a compass that instantly shows the management team whether they're on track toward their strategic goals or if they're totally deviating from the path. KPIs can cover a ton of different areas, but they are very often the direct measurements associated with those general goals you outlined in your key result areas. We're talking about things like tracking precise sales figures, measuring product performance, or calculating the exact return on certain organizational investments. These are the concrete, everyday metrics that tell you if your game plan is actually working out in the real world.
So let's pull all of this together. By linking these three concepts, what started as a confusing alphabet soup actually becomes a really structured, easy way to guarantee organizational success. It goes like this. Step 1. Your KPA establishes your broad responsibility, like, say, customer satisfaction. Step 2. Your KRA defines the specific goal, like improve customer retention. And step 3, your KPI measures the outcome, like achieve a 96% positive rating on post-purchase surveys. See how nicely that flows into one another? It takes you all the way from big abstract ideas right down to highly measurable details.
All of this leaves us with a pretty critical question for you to think about today. Are you actually tracking the right metrics for your real responsibilities? Take a second to just evaluate your own goals. Think about how aligning your broad key performance areas, your focused key result areas, and your specific key performance indicators could totally transform your daily workflow. It could help you ditch the distractions and pour your energy into that 20% of work that truly drives your success. We're demystifying the hidden structures and the somewhat complex psychology behind corporate behavior. We are looking at what is essentially the ultimate corporate tug of war, and we're going to explore how companies try to get absolutely everyone pulling the rope in the exact same direction.
So, I want you to start by putting yourself in the shoes of a manager for a second. You obviously want your department to succeed, you want to earn a great salary, and you want to protect your job. But what happens when the things that benefit you personally don't necessarily benefit the overall company or its shareholders? Why do genuinely good managers in those moments of conflicting motivations sometimes make really bad decisions for their organizations? Well, that tension is exactly what we are unpacking today. Here is our game plan for today's explainer. First, the agency problem. Second, defining goal congruence. Third, incentives and rewards. And finally, number 4, the creative accounting risk. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The agency problem. This right here is the foundational conflict built into the very DNA of business relationships.
This setup brilliantly illustrates the core disconnect we're talking about. On one side of the tug-of-war, we have the principals, the shareholders. Their primary goal is to maximize their economic welfare, which pretty much always means maximizing shareholder wealth and corporate profitability over the long run. But on the other side, we have the agents, the managers, and the employees. Now, according to our source material, employees are individuals with their own personal objectives and very specific departmental targets. So frankly, the wealth of the shareholders just isn't always going to be their top priority.
And this brings us directly to what's called agency theory. Basically, agency theory views a firm as this massive nexus of legal contracts. It looks specifically at the problems that inevitably pop up in a business relationship when one person, the principal, delegates decision-making authority over to someone else, the agent. Because agents are human beings, right? They have their own motivations, which means they won't always act in the best interests of the stakeholders. Sometimes they might even behave unethically, or perhaps even illegally, to serve their own ends. Within this theory, governance mechanisms have to be designed to overcome two very specific agency problems. The first one is adverse selection. Now, I know that sounds like a bunch of heavy corporate jargon, but let's break it down. Adverse selection is simply a situation where one party has way more information than the other, a dynamic we call information asymmetry. When an agent knows more than the principal, it dramatically increases the likelihood that the principal might select inferior alternatives, basically because they are operating in the dark.
The second major problem here is moral hazard. And again, this stems straight from that information asymmetry. A moral hazard is a situation where this imbalance of information actually increases the incentive for the agent to take undue risks or just to shirk their responsibilities altogether. Why would they do that? Well, because if things go south, the costs are incurred by the other party, the shareholders. The agent essentially gets to gamble, but it's the principal's money on the line. So, how on earth do we fix this inherent conflict? Let's move to Section 2, Defining Goal Congruence, the corporate Holy Grail.
Goal congruence is the exact term used to describe the situation when the goals of different interest groups perfectly coincide. It basically means that when individuals and departments are pursuing their own various objectives, those actions lead directly to the achievement of the objectives of the organization as a whole.
The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that this isn't just some nice-to-have cultural concept. It is structurally essential. The achievement of goal congruence is absolutely necessary in order to actually increase the profitability of the organization and to successfully reach its targets. Without this alignment, hitting those long-term corporate goals is next to impossible.
But okay, let's bring this theory back down to earth for a second. It may be said that in a quote-unquote perfect organization, individual goals and organizational goals should correspond perfectly. However, the source material makes it very clear. In reality, perfect correspondence is rarely the case. Employees have personal goals as well as organizational ones, and they're always going to try and balance the two. Because we just can't rely on perfect human nature, companies have to build actual systems to enforce this alignment. Let's transition to Section 3, Incentives and Rewards. A firm can't just cross its fingers and hope for the best. It needs to actively design its structures to minimize opportunism by its agents. This means management has to deliberately design work tasks, create highly specific incentives, and carefully draft employment contracts and other control mechanisms. These are the practical governance tools used to force alignment between the principals and the agents. So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, one primary way companies achieve this goal congruence is by carefully designing remuneration packages for their managers. This could mean profit-related pay and bonuses that are directly tied to the size of the profits. It also includes rewarding managers with shares, say when a private company goes public and invites managers to subscribe at an attractive offer price, or they might reward them with share options. Let's look a little closer at that last point, share options. This brilliantly illustrates the logic of, well, aligning their wallets. A share option scheme gives a selected employee a number of options, each giving them the right to subscribe for shares in the company at a fixed price after a certain date. The logic is crystal clear. The value of that option will increase if the company is successful and its share price goes up. If the manager makes decisions that are consistent with the objectives of the shareholders, their own personal wealth increases right alongside them. It is quite literally engineered goal congruence. But as with pretty much any engineered system, there are unintended consequences. Let's move to our final section, number 4, the creative accounting risk. You see, while tying a manager's pay directly to profits or share prices is a massively powerful tool to solve the agency problem, it introduces a brand new temptation. There is, unfortunately, a very real catch.
These exact incentive measures might actually encourage management to adopt what is known as creative accounting. Our sources describe creative accounting as methods, such as off-balance sheet finance, that are used to distort the reported performance of the company. So instead of doing the hard work to actually improve the company to hit those bonus targets, a manager might just manipulate the numbers in service of their own ends.
The massive danger here is that creative accounting presents a falsely favorable picture of the state of the company to shareholders, potential investors, and potential lenders. And this completely undermines the entire point of the incentives. We tied their pay to performance to stop managers from acting against the company, but the temptation of that reward leads us right back to the exact same moral hazard we were trying to solve in the first place. Because financial incentives alone can trigger this kind of creative accounting, an alternative approach is required. And that approach relies heavily on monitoring manager behavior. This involves establishing strict management audit procedures, introducing additional reporting requirements, and actively seeking assurance from managers that the shareholders' interests will be foremost in their priorities. Basically, you have to trust, but rigidly verify. Which brings us to the end of our journey today. We've seen exactly how the agency problem forces a wedge between shareholders and managers, how goal congruence attempts to bridge that gap with targeted remuneration, and how those very incentives require strict monitoring to prevent manipulation. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to consider regarding your own workplace. Are your company's incentives actually driving the right behavior, or are they just driving the illusion of it?
Have you ever wondered why brilliant teams, teams with massive resources, sometimes just can't seem to pull in the same direction? Well, welcome to today's Explainer. We're exploring a pretty fascinating concept today that I like to call building the alignment bridge. Basically, we're going to dig into the core aspects of goal congruence, pulling from some really insightful source literature on strategic performance management. So let's find out exactly how to get everyone in an organization rowing to the exact same rhythm. The big core problem we face is this. Why do employees sometimes act in their own self-interest instead of what's best for the organization? I mean, let's be real. Even top managers naturally have their own personal objectives. When a company delegates decision-making authority, there's just this inherent risk. If those personal goals don't line up with the organization's overarching strategy, you get instant friction. It's a completely natural human tendency, for sure. But man, it causes a massive roadblock to collective success. So, how do we overcome that natural friction? The solution is what we call goal congruence. Simply put, this is the alignment of employees' self-interest and behavior with those overarching organizational objectives. Think about it. In a perfect organization, individual goals and organizational goals would correspond flawlessly. When a division manager takes actions that are in their own best interest, those actions would automatically result in achieving top management's goals too. Goal congruence is absolutely crucial. It's our ultimate solution to that self-interest problem, and it's the whole focus of our analysis today. To build this alignment bridge, we're going to use 5 foundational pillars. Number 1, communication and understanding. Number 2, creating direction. Number 3, motivation. Number 4, incentives. And number 5, connection. All right, let's look at pillar number 1, communication and understanding. This is the first of what I kind of consider our knowing pillars. The sources we're looking at make it crystal clear that operational managers have a massive responsibility here. They have to be aware of what actions are desirable and ensure that goals are properly perceived by the team. But let's contrast the everyday corporate reality for a second. You have informal channels like face-to-face interactions and team meetings, and then you have formal channels like strict budgets and dense financial documents. Often, completely different goals are communicated across these two channels. Like, a leader might verbally praise risk-taking during an informal chat, but the formal budget document demands extreme cost-cutting. You can see how that creates immediate confusion, right? And here's the tricky part. There is an inherent risk that even if communication is perfectly executed by management, it can still be perceived in totally different ways by different people. Because of this risk, organizations really have to internalize their goals in a good manner. The literature warns that if you don't do this, employees might feel a complete inability to actually achieve those goals. And you know what happens then? If they feel they can't win, they just stop trying, and that completely shatters any hope for goal congruence. Moving right along to pillar number 2, creating direction. You know, a major reason for a lack of goal congruence is honestly just a sheer absence of direction regarding employee behavior. To fix this, performance management is basically a tool that facilitates efficient communication about what managers actually want their subordinates to focus on. It follows a pretty logical step-by-step flow. First, the manager provides clear information and direction. Second, because of that clarity, the employee understands exactly what is expected of them and how to perform adequately. And finally, step 3, the employee can now contribute effectively to the achievement of the organizational goals. It's like a giant puzzle, and everyone needs to know where their piece fits. The absolutely crucial point to take away from this section is that organizations need to increase their employees' understanding of the strategic objectives as well as the organization's value drivers. It's not just about handing out a daily to-do list. Actually, scratch that. It's nothing like a to-do list. Employees need to grasp the bigger picture. They need to know exactly how their specific daily efforts drive actual value for the overarching mission of the company. Okay, pillar number 3, motivation. So now we're moving from knowing what to do to how we actually feel about it, because simply having the knowledge to perform adequately just isn't enough. I like to call this the self-interest trap. Our source text explicitly warns that employees can act in their own self-interest by, for example, allocating resources just to make their own personal performance report look better without it actually befitting the organization as a whole. They're basically just padding their own stats. Plus, one of the strongest reasons for demotivation is simply an inherent dislike for the work allocated to them. When that happens, it's a total breakdown of our collective goals. To combat this, we have to look at what actually drives human behavior. And the reasons for motivation vary wildly among employees. While some people are deeply motivated by formal recognition and positive appraisals, others are driven purely by a sense of commitment and responsibility to the job itself, even without any required financial payoff. The core takeaway here is that you have to tap into these diverse drivers, because the more motivated the employees of the organization are, the better the goal congruence is going to be. Which brings us perfectly to pillar number 4, incentives. Incentives are the primary lever organizations use to actively influence that employee motivation we just talked about. To increase the likelihood of employees working to achieve their individual goals in a way that helps the company, you really have to look at how you're rewarding them. The data on this is super clear. Research suggests individuals simply perform better when they are rewarded. Well-designed rewards and compensation create goal congruence by stimulating individuals to increase their effort toward organizational goals. It gives them a concrete incentive to make decisions that match the organization's vision.
And finally, pillar number 5, connection. Think about this. You could have fantastic communication, crystal clear direction, super motivated staff, and great incentives. But if they aren't tied together structurally, your alignment bridge is going to fall apart under pressure. You have to build a straightforward connection. Step 1, set goals. Step 2, establish performance measures. Step 3, provide incentives. The source materials emphasize this heavily. To truly align an employee's self-interest with the overall organizational objectives, it is strictly necessary to relate their specific incentives directly to the established performance measures.
Let's look at this punchy, distilled truth taken directly from the source text. By linking incentives to certain goals, individuals tend to pay more attention to what is important. It's such a simple statement, right? But it perfectly sums up the core thesis of our discussion today. If something is truly a strategic priority for the organization, you absolutely must link the individual's incentives to it. That is literally how you get them to pay attention. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Really ask yourself, are your organization's incentives actually rewarding the right behavior, or are they just feeding individual self-interest? Take a second to evaluate your own team's alignment bridge. Are your formal and informal communications perfectly aligned? Do your team members genuinely understand those big picture value drivers? And most importantly, are you structurally connecting their daily rewards to the ultimate success of the whole organization? Thanks so much for joining me today.